So I just want to do a quick introduction for everybody out there who don't know either of you, but I wanted to welcome everybody to another edition of For the Love of Art. This is our interview series from Legion Paper that's hosted by Michael Ginsburg. He's the co-founder of Legion Paper. The series invites artisans from all corners of the fine art world to learn about their craft, the importance of paper, and a peek into those artist studios. My name is Mark Shotland, and I'll be your moderator. Throughout the interview, we invite you to post any questions that you have in the chat window down below. I'll do my best to have Gary and Michael answer as many of those questions as possible. We're also recording this, so if you miss it or if you have to bail at a certain point, we will be loading this up to our YouTube page next week. Michael Ginsburg, he formed Legion Paper in 1994 with his partner Len Levine. Together, they have expanded the availability of fine art papers in the United States and helped develop some of today's most iconic paper brands, including Lenox, Coventry Rag, Stonehenge, and Somerset. Michael's guest today is Gary Lichtenstein. Gary is the founder of Gary Lichtenstein Editions, which is a publisher and printer of fine art silkscreen editions and multiples. For the past 45 years, Gary has produced a wide range of silkscreen editions with some of today's best-known artists, including Robert Cottingham, Robert Indiana, and Ken Price, just to name a small few. GLE routinely partners with nonprofit organizations to design captivating fundraising initiatives that support mission statements and engage new audiences. Some of those we'll be discussing today, and we'll see examples of those. So, Michael, let me toss it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. And Gary, I just want to say thank you for carving out some time for us.
No,
Are you there, Gary?
yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I just want to thank you and Melissa for carving out some time. I really appreciate it. I love your background. I have to tell you. I mean, it's so typical of what you do without a doubt. So, Gary, you and I go back. I mean, I think they had gunpowder when you and I started working together.
We go back to the beginning of what we go back to.
We go back to the beginning of when Silkscreen was really, really hot, and it's coming back. I mean, it's coming back without a doubt. But how did you get involved? How did you get involved in serigraph printing, Gary?
I went out to San Francisco to go to the San Francisco Art Institute after a couple of years.
On Chestnut Street.
Yeah, the Italian with the view of the bay.
Unbelievable.
Where it was like, oh, I don't know if this is a school or if this is just an Italian villa looking out over the bay. I went out there in 1971, and at the time it was, what do you want to study? And I said, well, whatever's available, because I was coming out of Syracuse University with no portfolio, I wasn't like applying. And
right.
Well, there's this thing, you could do sculpture or silkscreen. I said, whichever, I'll just take the silkscreen. But I didn't realize then that there was an artist there, his name's Robert Freed. He passed away young in 1975 while I was working with him. He was a teacher there, and he and I met up, and it was one of those things where I said, do you need any help out in your own studio? And in those days, half the time he never showed up to teach anyway. He was in his own studio.
Really?
I went out there and he was doing silk screens, and I saw what he was doing. It was all early by hand, all by hand, exposing the screens in the sun.
Right. No automatics.
No, nothing. We were actually using silk, not a monofilament poly.
Wow, really?
I got hooked. I saw the color. I mean, it was San Francisco.
Yeah. How could you not get hooked? But the medium has come. The medium has come a long way, Gary. And I know, we have a lot to cover. We got a lot to push across the table, because I know that you and Melissa put together some slides, and I want to talk about some of the interesting projects that you've been working on, and some of the artists that you're currently doing work for now. Right. So, I'm going to give you, and I'd also, given the fact that we can be a little bit more mobile, I'd also like to show some folks a little bit of a walkthrough of the studio.
Right. No, and again, we'll do that. And Melissa, help me pull up some of the slides if we want to show some of the artworks.
What's really interesting, Gary, and I know this, when people think of silkscreen, I mean, they don't even use the word serigraph. They use the word silkscreen. When they think of silkscreen, the first thing that comes into their head, oh yeah, I have a T-shirt that one of my friends had silkscreen.
Right.
That industry is, to me, and obviously you do a little bit of it in terms of charitable stuff, but it's a totally different market. Totally different market.
It's a totally different market, but it's not that totally a different process.
Right.
The beauty of silkscreen then and now, when is you could print on anything. Silkscreen, you print on glass, you could print on wood, you could print on metal, you could print on paper. The T-shirt phenomenon, obviously, it gave rise in the early 70s also, because, imagine life before silkscreen T-shirts. Well, all of a sudden there were silkscreen T-shirts in the 70s. Part of it was also an adjunct of the industry. It's different, textile ink versus
right.
Hands behind me, and we'll move away from this location, but these are my oil-based ink cans. Now I use water-based ink now, but
to that point, Gary, give a little bit of a difference between oil-based and water-based so everybody understands.
Well, the difference, it starts in that the only ink available until the 90s was oil-based silkscreen ink. And oil and T-shirt ink was made of a plastisol, but oil-based was used for printing posters, point of purchase, artwork, anything on paper, as we'll talk about. And the number of people who were silkscreening also knew that oil-based was paint thinners and xylenes, and it was toxic. So, the longevity of people doing silkscreen had a lot to do with the level of toxicity of the materials.
Right.
When water-based came in, it became more user-friendly, which was in the 90s, but it was also an environmental thing. Oil, went from oil paint to latex paint, from painting houses with, one kind of paint to another.
Right.
So, but ironically, I was working with oil-based because of the color was just so beautiful.
Has that changed, Gary? I mean, to water-based?
It took a long time for the water-based manufacturers to really delve into the fine art market and develop beautiful water-based colors, because you couldn't just pour acrylic color into ink.
Right.
Ink chemistry on its own. So it has to go through a screen and it has to mix a certain way. So it took a while, yes. It took, a good 10 years for the water-based inks to really, the color to come equal to oil.
And also oil paint versus, you're talking about viscosity also in terms of water-based versus oil. I would imagine that oil, it's a heavier compound, thicker compound.
Right. But it also, if you take 30 years of my printing, 25, 30 years of my printing, and you're using certain materials, and then you switch to, say, water, which is a water, it's like a kind of like 409. It's not completely water. It's
right.
But it's biodegradable. I didn't want to switch because I didn't want to learn. I didn't want to start over learning.
Really?
I was like, oh, are you kidding me? Because everything switched, the screens and what you could do. You couldn't go answer the phone anymore because the screen would dry out, or, there was a whole new component, which, among all those who are listening to us, if there are any questions down the road about what we use and how we do it, I'm happy to answer those questions.
You're also able to get rid of the circulating fans by switching over to water a little bit, no?
Yeah, but then people stay longer in the studio. You know, with the oil, they lasted 5 minutes and said, "Oh, I got to get out of here."
Yeah, yeah. Circulation of air, you
Company
know, yeah.
lasts a little longer. Well, you know, but that's just a sidebar.
There's
Right.
one question that actually pertains to this from Earl. Where can an artist find good information on water-based screen printing ink suitable for fine art printing? Do you have any go-to places?
If you you can go online, but just like I would only recommend Legion paper for the paper I use, I recommend TW Graphics, who are out in California as a supplier. They kind of got it down. There are other art store water-based Speedball and other things that you could use, but given what I've done, and my East Coast supplier is K-Rock, which they also do some great silk screens, and they're over in Brooklyn.
Yeah, we know them. And they predominantly do T-shirts.
Yeah, and they do a lot of posters and prints.
Right.
Yeah.
So to that point, Mark, you can post that from Gary on the information page, right? In terms of the inks.
Yep, exactly. I'll post all that.
And again, like we were saying, then it goes another step further. They make beautiful ink that goes through the screens, but there are a lot of individual people who, that are making some beautiful color agents that you can mix into the inks to beef up the color. I mean,
right.
So like I've used Guerra paints in New York. I had a chemist in San Francisco. I met a young guy who had a company from Canada, and they were making beautiful pigments. And I say this in that not every pigment can be mixed into silkscreen. Like you can't just take Liquitex or Golden's paint, which are beautiful colors, and throw them in a jar of silkscreen ink.
Right.
They won't go through the screen. They, so getting to the color, well, then, there's fun in that as well.
So, Gary, I mean, to what you do, which I consider to be very unique and different, is you touched on it a little bit as it related to ink. What you do in terms of additives, I mean, some of the things and some of the magic that you do on the table in terms of glitter, in terms of, almost making each particular print unique unto itself. It's almost like a monoprint. I mean, and I think for lack, so we can have time to really see that, I think maybe we should start moving around a little bit and get into some of the pieces and some of the talk about some of the studio pieces.
Yeah, no, we can do that. And I'll get up and I'll walk over towards the other part of the studio. One of the things too, as you say, use of materials, what's kept me connected to making silk screens has been a combination, you can't just print on anything. So I'm gonna interject here and say, look, it has a lot to do with the ink and the paper.
Right, without a doubt.
Legion and you guys, we go back all those years because we were always saying, what kind of paper do you have for us? You were waiting for the guy to come and show us some new paper. Well, one of the things that I've noticed with ink and paper is, like, you use iridescence in your ink, it could really look beautiful on one color on the paper. But if you put another layer over it with another ink, all of a sudden you don't see the iridescence anymore. So the layering of things is part of silkscreen. It's a process. But building up different screens on the papers, there's an art to it, but there's an experiment to it. Like, for instance, the Coventry we get from you, which is beautiful paper. 10 years later, I'm still in the discussion, which is the front side, which is the back side. Yeah. Every time I get it, it's like, I like this side better.
Well, you know, to that point, I mean, the beauty of the Coventry rag, I mean, as long as we just brought it up, is that you can print on either side.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And one side is textured and the other side is smooth. So depending upon what the print is,
right,
you know, you'll take a choice, you'll take a pick.
Right. But ironically, like talk about, you know, trade secrets and Murphy's Law. You know which side I always choose to print on? Whichever way the paper curls this way. Curls this way, it just
well, you know, Gary, to that point, the paper should not be curling.
I know, but it depends on where, you know, there is, I'm telling you, there's this like.
Well, yeah, but you know, I'll just very briefly, I mean, I created that Coventry rag for Silkscreen specifically in 1971. And the artist that I created it for was Urte, you know, and if you know any of Urte's pieces,
of course,
he threw everything at the sheet, everything, gold, I mean, everything.
Yeah.
He would.
And those are the days that inspired us, really.
Yeah. That was Chromacom, by the way, Chromacom.
Right. And it wasn't always, like you said, it wasn't the artists who came up with the ideas. It was the studio and the artist.
Right.
You know, we can talk about like Diamond Dust. I have, you know, I do Diamond Dust. I always thought Diamond Dust was a little glitchy, you know, kitschy, you know. But I also would say, no, I don't want to do Diamond Dust because it would get everywhere in the studio.
Oh, right.
So then finally an artist from Brazil, Ruben Robier, come on, Gary, please. All right. And, you know, the minute someone saw it, they said, oh, I like to do that. And again, because Coventry is so stable, but what a lot of people don't realize is in order to print certain things, you got to print a layer of gloss ink.
Right.
It then sticks to.
Yeah.
In other words, the paper has to have at least 3 or 4 layers of ink on it for anything to stick to it. It won't.
Right. And a good part of stability. And then after I just, you know, a little bit of stability, then I think we'll move on and do a little tour of the studio. But you know, the interesting thing about serigraph, and I think you agree with me, Gary, is what I tell everybody that's printing, whether it be serigraph or any printmaking medium, the paper has to adjust to the environment. You got to open it up and you got to let it breathe. You got to let it adjust.
Right. Well, and that's why I was in San Francisco for almost 35 till 2000. San Francisco was a beautiful city because it stayed dry, you know, or it stayed even.
Right.
Yeah, the fog, or, you know, whereas, you know, a bunch of printers and, you know, they take the paper out and you put it on the racks and you get it used to the climate. And then it's 95 degrees humidity the next day. And you're like, oh, that paper's going to stretch. And, you know, you can't call Michael and say, my paper's stretched. You're halfway through an edition. So, you know, let's go over to the press.
Okay, let's do it. Where's Melissa? You know, we should introduce Melissa Marr.
Here.
I'm going to follow you.
Okay. Melissa's behind you, following me.
So this is the studio that I love this space, Gary. This is such a great space.
When I left San Francisco after many years, behind me, by the way, is the press and the inks, and we'll go walk around. But I ended up, I'm originally from Connecticut, grew up there, but when I went out west, that's where my adult life was. But when I came back east, I set the Silkscreen studio up in a barn in Ridgefield, Connecticut.
Wow.
And, you know, the barn was like on a big piece of property. I didn't own it, but it was, you know, ours to use. And I couldn't have been happier there, except for the fact that the first couple of years, I realized, oh shit, this barn is not insulated. So, little problem with the cold in the winter. I had to
Yeah.
throw, but it was during the years in the barn, I was there for 10 before I moved into this studio, which is in Jersey City at a place called Mana Contemporary. But the barn, coming back east, you have to laugh because first off, I didn't understand climatizing anything. It was hot, humid, cold, and freezing.
Right.
And one day in the middle of the winter, I walked in, I said, now I know why after 20 years of receiving materials like ink and stuff, it would say, do not store below 32 degrees or do not let freeze.
Interesting.
One day I walk into the barn and the heat went off and it's like 15 degrees. And I said, now I know why they don't store under 52 degrees. But the barn was where I was doing Robert Cottingham, and I was also working with Robert Indiana. And I had all but thought I was going to stop silk screening because digital technology had kind of come in and taken up a lot of the space in the market and what have you.
Right.
But it was artists who had come to me and said, oh, no, I only want to do a silk screen. And I'd say, well, really? I mean, you sure? I mean, it's more time, more expensive.
Right.
Oh, no. I only want to do silk screen. And much to what you were saying, there's been a comeback because it's more retro, and
Right.
but it's also real paint on paper. I mean, this is a Cey Adams piece I'm working
Yeah,
on,
that's a recent project you're doing now, right?
doing a black and white one, and then another white one. But like this is your Coventry,
Right.
and this has like 18 layers of ink on it. And when you get up close to silkscreen prints, you could tell it's like paint that you're printing with. It's ink.
Right. Right. You can see it.
But you can see it and feel it. Right now, I'm also working on this piece for Bob Gruen, the photographer. And what you can't see from where you are is the sky has like a silver powder in the ink, so that the sky is glittering, and he has like a little black powder in the black ink, so he kind of glistens. Now,
That's a John Lennon. That's a John Lennon piece.
yeah, we're finishing this for a release with Bob Gruen, and again, some of the money that we're raising goes to the Statue of Liberty Fund and the museum over there and the Statue of Liberty.
I mean, Gary, and that's the beauty of what you do, in terms of, giving back. I mean, especially during the pandemic, printing, doing things for charitable organizations and giving back of your time and giving back, dollars as well. I mean, it's really fantastic that you do that.
Well, and not to say Silkscreen itself is entirely, a compulsion. You just, you want to see color, you want to keep things moving. Addressing back in the pandemic a year ago in March, when everything got shut down, Melissa and I were, we realized, okay, we're going to shut down the art business, our world is all shutting down. And then, I don't know, during the first week or two, we read essential businesses could stay open. And what we found out by virtue of kind of looking around is Silkscreen was deemed essential because it was a signage technique.
Right.
It always has been. That's where Silkscreen, Robert Indiana, and all of the pop artists, Warhol, they saw it as a commercial printing technique that they adapted to art,
Right.
or vice versa. So we said, well, if it's a essential printing technique, let's print whatever we can to help people during the pandemic.
So you did a series of pieces, right?
No, Melissa, could you grab me a couple Eric ores? So we partnered up. We made a couple phone calls, and Urban Pathways in New York has buildings that house the homeless that are coming off the street. And so we began to do these health and safety signage. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Now, this was our version of, COVID signs. And believe me, we were ahead of the game.
Now, who is the artist on that, Gary?
Eric Orr. Eric and I, Melissa, go back a ways. We were working at the time. This is a good story. We were working at the time on the Keith Haring, Eric Orr collaboration.
Right.
But I'll find one and I'll show it to you. And believe it or not, Melissa and I said, well, no, that's art. We need to do something to help people, So
Sure.
And the signage thing was,
Right. Now, some of these are signed, right? Some of these are.
Afterwards, we sent out over 1,000 pieces that went into these buildings in New York where people were too adverse to reading COVID signs.
Wow. And that's was that on our Star Dream?
No, this was what was on your Coventry.
Okay.
This one is Star Dream.
Got it. Oh, that's so cool.
And part of the story as we write it down, and when the pandemic hit, everything shut down. So we figured that we only have whatever paper is in the studio and whatever ink is in the studio, because everything shut down. So I had all of these small sheets sitting around from old projects that were blank.
Right.
I said, all right, how many do we have? Then we called you and we said to you guys, you said, what's sitting on the loading dock that's cheap and free? And you said, I love the name of it. Send me some. And this stuff has been like everywhere.
Right.
But
that's very cool.
So that was that. Yeah. This was the Eric Orr piece.
Now, you told me about that piece. Now, that is not black paper, Gary. Tell me about that.
No, the black is printed on white paper.
Right.
We had been talking about that. Obviously you could buy all sorts of color papers and silkscreen on them. But if you go to buy black paper and you want a silkscreen and you want your color bright, you got to print white on the black and then print the color on the white.
Right.
So we wanted it to be on a black paper, but we wanted the white and the day glow to be bright. So we printed all the black. So it's a reverse silkscreen.
Got it.
The white is the white of the paper, and the black is printed ink. And then we decal them down, tear off the edges. That's all part of the aesthetic that we went with.
Yeah.
So again, okay, so, can I ask you some questions?
Well, the press behind you is an automatic, right?
Semi-automatic.
Semi-automatic. Well, yeah, the one thing I have to tell you, Gary, the one thing that I've known of you for years is that you are very hands-on. I mean, very hands-on. I mean, instead of pushing it off and I know that you have helpers in the studio, but you are so involved with your creativity, if you will, that you're always involved.
Well, and what's kept me that involved, besides loving printing, and I'm a painter, and I love making paintings, is I love thinking in layers. I just love thinking in layers, and I love taking something that's like a painting and converting it into layers in black and white. Because you have to do that in order to make your screens.
Right.
I'll do a quick walkthrough. But one of the things too is I love working with assistants who also in tandem, it's like a little bit like making music. You can't, you don't try to do it completely on your own, but you let yourself interact with the artist and interact maybe with a couple of assistants where, because it's a lot of work, don't get me wrong,
Sure.
but hands
Sure.
up, it's labor intensive, it's physical, you got to get dirty, you got to like cleaning screen.
Yeah, but you love to have ink on your hands, Gary.
Yeah, you know, that I love not to sometimes.
All
So,
right.
so yeah, I stayed involved. And part of what also kept me involved is I love the relationship with the artist,
Right.
you know, for better or for worse, for, you know, whether we're successful in our relationship or not. Most are. But I always use the analogy, my Silkscreen studio is like, is to artists what a recording studio is to a musician.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, obviously a musician writes the songs, plays the music, blah, blah, blah. But if he wants to go into a recording studio, he's got to learn that he's got to work with the engineer, the mixer, the sound man, the this man.
Sure.
And there are certain studios that, you know, can produce within an aesthetic of certain caliber. And most artists, as you probably know as well, they don't know how to silk screen. They don't want to learn how to silk screen. They just want to know what's possible. So constantly I'm driving to reimagine what their artwork would look like as a silk screen. Because what I've always been very clear about within my years of printing, I'm not interested in reproducing a painting. I don't want to make it look exactly like what you're showing me.
Right.
It's a process that if that's what the artist or the client or person wanted, their expectations are not fitting with the silk screen medium.
Right. And you can and they can change, an artist can change, and you can change as you go as well, right?
You know, like even with, you know, with Robert Cunningham, he loves printmaking. He's a beautiful painter, but he loves going into the printmaking studio. And he's in his, when I was working with him, he was in his 70s. So he'd been in and out of print studios. But he came in and like, we spent a day, oh, can you try that color? Oh, I like that color. Oh, that looks nice.
Wow.
But he'd always go back to what he liked the most, which was what he painted.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting because he's a photorealist painter. I mean, you know, and that medium, silkscreen, is kind of, I mean, I'm not going to say it doesn't have dimension. It's kind of flat color, but to your point, his images pop, really pop.
Right. Well, and even to like what you said when you use the word, well, silkscreen is flat color.
Yeah.
Where that comes from is back in the 70s, in the late 60s, where silkscreen was very rude. It was very rudimentary. It hadn't expanded the quality of all the details. But so everybody was used to seeing silkscreens like Andy Warhol or Robert Indiana, where it was flat color, flat color, flat color. A group of us in the 80s started to use silkscreen differently by layering more color on top of it. And again, I go back to, you know, while we were doing that, you were making sure the paper was staying stable, because you could layer 50, 60 colors and it would start to look like a painting.
Right. Right.
It wouldn't look flat anymore. It would look, whoa, what's all this going on? Because you were just layering so much.
So you're building up color.
You're building up screens, you know, building up one Mylar after another. So, you know, and when I talk about Mylar, This is when I'm using the word mylar. This is a mylar. So this has the image that exposes onto the screen.
Right.
So this is why I say you have to see in black and white, because the mylars have to be made in black and white. Like, this is a mylar of,
Cey's American flag.
it's just an opaque white.
Yeah.
Why there's not a lot on the mylar, because that's all we're printing. And then what you're doing, you know, and the other thing I want to mention too is silkscreen printing. Oftentimes, you know, we talk about it's all hand printed because we're doing it with a squeegee and the screen. And, you know, it was early in the mid 70s where this chemist that I was working with, he took me out to Sacramento, and that's when he showed me this piece of equipment. And they were printing supermarket signs, okay? They were printing like Stop and Shop signs.
Really?
Stacks of cardboard, and they were just going boom, 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 boom. And I stood there after finally getting a degree in college, and I said, what the hell? They didn't tell me about this machine in college. We're still doing it like this, okay?
Yeah.
Well, I begged, I borrowed, you know, my Uncle Sid, you know, he loaned me some money. It wasn't that it was expensive. It's kind of like, oh, I'm going to go out and buy a car, you know, and I'm going to. So I bought this press and started printing on it. And in the early years, you're still putting the ink through on the screen, you're doing, everything is the same, but I can even show you, it pulls the ink across and it allows me to do a lot more printing in a different way. Now, it's no trade secret. They make them, they still make them. But nowadays, you could go out and find one like for cheap, maybe, because nobody wants to do this kind of work. I mean, everybody's like going digital. So silkscreen equipment is like a dinosaur. But this press is now 1978 is when I got it. In the first 3 or 4 years, someone would say, well, I can't believe you're printing 25 or 30 colors. And I'd say, no, and we do it by hand. And I realized people didn't, the minute you said you had a press, then they thought you were automatic, you were commercial. So I would constantly be shy about it until what I realized is like saying that here's a computer, but there's no keyboard. I mean, the equipment is out there to make screens and expose screens. So the myth of how things are printed, where'd you go, Michael? Whoops. Anyway, the myth of how things are printed is it's ink going through a screen onto paper.
Great. I don't know where Michael went, but while we're waiting for him, Amber had a question.
I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Because we also want to get on to your presentation. I know you put a great presentation together of some of your work. In the meantime, can you talk about any of the Fujimura prints that you did?
Mako Fujimura?
Yes.
He and I worked together off and on through the years. And as a matter of fact, the beauty of working with Mako is wherever you left off, you're going to start again, but it's different. He's just a remarkable artist. Very abstract painter, very free form. And we used a lot of iridescence and a lot of powders. And we used a set of 3 different screens turned upside down and backwards to create the abstract shapes. You can go to my website and there's some pieces on there you could see.
Mark, I think we, you know, for the sake of time, I think we should start a little bit of that slide thing that Melissa put together.
Sure. Yeah.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
So Melissa's wearing a mask because she only had one vaccine, one shot, right?
Wearing a mask because there are other people in the studio right now too.
Okay. Why is my
What do you do?
oh, there we go. Okay. Can you go full screen, Melissa?
Yep.
Great. So here we have the gold dust and the silver, Gary.
This is Jonas Leriche. We were working on a set of monoprints, and
To move forward, just press
Press
that
that.
arrow
and
or backwards.
so basically you're silk screening a gloss or a gloss clear in the areas that you want the leaf to stick to, and then you brush away the leaf where you don't want it. This is where we were throwing some diamond dust on the paper. The image has ink on it and the diamond dust will stick to the ink.
Right.
This is another artist recently worked with, younger street artists, eyebrows. And while these look, they're black and white pieces, there are 2 layers of white ink that is printed underneath the black. And then the paper is deckled so it looks like black paper.
Mhm. Got it.
This is Cey Adams working on the Mylars for these 2 prints that are in the background.
So how many different styles of the American flag did Cey do?
Well, Cey loves brands. So he's been doing the American flag for years. We worked together on a really interesting American flag project in 2016. And it was also in conjunction with the timing of the opening of the African American Museum in Smithsonian in Washington.
Right.
We're now revisiting it. So, but his flags are hand collaged. So we figured out a way to combine silkscreen and collage, and at the same time create an edition, say, of 35. But they're all like individually a little different, a little this. But this is him just collaging the Mylars for the screen.
Wow.
This is Bob and I in the studio working on some of the John Lennon pieces.
Now, is the John Lennon pieces, is that a suite series or?
Yeah, it's a suite of prints that's coming out later in the year, but right now we're releasing just the Statue of Liberty piece.
Right.
We're doing it in conjunction with his 40th year anniversary. This artist, Matthew Princeton, again, you know, much younger than I am. And again, you know, the interesting part is who's using silkscreen. It used to be, you know, established artists, but again, now it's a process that younger artists and older artists, they just, if they know what it is, they just love to use it. That heel in the picture is a Robert Indiana print, one of the latter prints that he made before he passed away. and it's silver on a blend of color.
Now his trademark was it love or what hope
His
love?
was love, but it was always the tilted O.
Right.
You know, the O tilted. And I'd been working with him on a project, Love is God, for the Aldridge Museum, when he was in the studio and he said, so Gary, I never really showed too many people this word, but I really like this word. This is 2014. And I said, look, I'd love it. Can we do something? He goes, well, you're going to have to be strong about it because people are going to tell you that it's not as pretty as love. And I said, all right. He goes, but don't you think it's as important? And I said, that's the spirit, So that was it's a great legacy story. That's Matt,
Yeah.
Prince. These are some of the other Eric Orr.
Those are fabulous. Those are great.
The irony of this print was we did a limited edition that didn't have any of the stuff for keep your distance. Then we did a limited edition to help raise money for New York City schools, and it was used as a kind of an image with poster, but it was also done in an animation. When the COVID crisis hit, that next week, I started looking through my drawers saying, I must have an image that would make sense with keep your distance when you're walking. And this is before
this was a piece that you had.
Right.
Interesting.
And that's what helped trigger. I got on the phone with Eric. I said, Eric, are you good with this? He goes, no, I'm great. This is perfect. Because we were all panicking. Like literally we were trying to say, well, how far is 6 feet? We were all doing it.
Right.
These were the silk screens.
Oh, those are great.
And by the way, I guess it was the fact that we were shut down, quote unquote, but these all have like 8 or 9 screens on them.
Wow.
There's a lot of color putting on it.
So for each color, Gary, you have to do, it's one stencil per color, correct?
One screen per color, set it up, print as many as you're gonna print. Thing about Silkscreen is you don't go back and you don't do 2 and go back and print 50 more.
Right.
You're gonna do 50, you're gonna do them all 50. You're gonna do 100, you're gonna do all 100. And you put the first color on all 100, the second color on all 100, so it's a cumulative process. This was the studio right before we were shipping them all out.
Wow. Those are great, Gary.
Eric loves day glow, and Silkscreen is one of the only ways to print day glow orange, day glow green, and you and I have to laugh. That takes me back to rock and roll.
Well, iridescent day glow inks. They're coming back. They're coming back now, big time in watercolor. Right. Iridescent and metallic colors are. It's the latest craze. It really is.
Right.
Latest craze.
While we were, I was silk screening day glow rock and roll posters in San Francisco, then we had the light that we put on them. You remember that? Yeah.
Now, Gary, you can print. I see the racks. Right. So, in the real time, you print one. How many colors can you print a day?
Well, that depends on how many pieces of paper you're printing. So, I could print 2 or 3 colors a day on 150 pieces of paper.
Okay.
But it depends on how complicated the color is and then how many pieces of paper. Nowadays, I'm printing editions, generally edition size are 50, But you remember back in the day also, some of the editions were 200 or 150.
Right, right. 250, with some APs and PPs.
But they were all still considered limited edition.
Correct.
And part of that is because we canceled the screens, we destroyed the Mylars, and we forgot how we made them, you know.
Well, but to that point, Gary, I mean, I know you know that we know this, and I don't know whether it's because of digital or whatever, but the series numbers of silkscreen prints are now much smaller. The same is true of intaglio prints. Where they once were, to your point, say a series of 250 pieces with 10 APs or 5 PPs. Now they're down to like 50, 35. I mean, that's where we are now.
Right. But again, it's where we are is somehow, we're captured in a moment of time that's part to do with business and markets. And
Yeah.
if you look at the spirit of silkscreen, etching, lithography, intaglio, as printing that goes, they move slower, as a printing process. Silkscreen, the screen and everything, putting the ink on the paper, it moves faster, but it's also dries faster.
Right.
So you can
Right.
more work to a print. I know, a couple other printers that I know who are in, back in the day. I mean, we were doing 50, 60 colors, 100 colors on a print. When we were doing that, we were doing 4 or 5 colors a day.
Wow.
Otherwise, it would take years. So, but now it's changed a little bit, but you're still in the early 70s, when Andy, when Warhol was beginning to really pump some silk screens out, he also understood, well, let's do 100 posters and we'll do 10 of these. And because part of it is the drive was you're reaching more people.
Mm.
That's what limited editions were doing in the early days. Someone who saw the painting, but how about 100 people who saw the prints?
Right.
So it wasn't all market driven, it was exposure driven. And obviously we had no social media and we had no other way of seeing a piece of art. So,
well, Andy didn't go. I don't remember any of Andy's prints because we made some product for him as well back then. I don't remember a lot of them being more than 5, 6, 7 colors.
no, he minimized the whole process. He figured out a look, and a look was also included in how many screens. But those guys developed a look that I almost say it's a look by mistake.
Yeah. Same thing with Herring.
Right.
Gary, I think Mark, you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, we have a few questions. Actually, it's a good point to
Yeah.
stop and ask them. These are more process questions.
Yeah.
Um,
On the Mylars, do you produce those on an inkjet printer?
Nowadays we do. The photos got stuck. Nowadays we do. In the
You're done.
oh, let me go back. In the early days, or turn it off. We used to hand paint everything with India ink on Mylar. Or when we were doing things with photography, we'd go into a local photographic shop and they would print stuff out like on film and stuff. But yes, we're using an inkjet printer and an inkjet film.
And how are you registering so many colors? One viewer noticed that you didn't pin the paper. How are you registering when you're doing multiple colors?
I'll show you my trade secret. Here, let me turn the thing. You want to put the full screen on again, Melissa?
They're seeing you full screen.
Oh. These little guys, it's very, very high tech. It's a blade with a piece of tape, and you put it down on the table, and you put one there on the right, one there on the left, and one here on the left, and here. So you put the paper into the guide one time, every time in the same place. So the whole thing with pinning paper was kind of old school, where you had a little hole in the paper and you put the paper down on the pins. But it was too time consuming and it always ripped and it didn't work.
Right, right.
So we advanced technology to X-Acto blades.
One other question is, how fine of a screen can you use with the TW inks?
I go up to maybe a 230 mesh. And I like the 180s, but the 230 mesh, you can go finer, but the finer the mesh, the faster the ink dries out in the screen.
And a question on the John Lennon prints. Are you using halftones for the John Lennon prints?
Yeah, we're using flat color and halftone.
I like those Lennon prints are great, Gary.
Yeah,
The Statue of Liberty is so perfect for that.
yeah, yeah. Well, and again, you know, along with the print, there's another piece of paper that tells the story.
Right.
And every artist that we work with, you know, we try to draw a story. What's the story behind this, or what's the story, or what's the story behind the painting? And Bob Gruen is a consummate storyteller. So the stories that he has, along with the story behind him and John going out to the Statue of Liberty, it helps bring the piece alive, and if you can begin to tell that story. So
yeah.
All right, I think that's about
Mark,
the
did
end
you
of
have
our
another
hour.
question or no?
No, I think we got all the questions answered, and that brings us right to the top of the hour.
Gary, you know, we could stay on for another hour, but you know, we can't. But I want to thank you. I mean, really, you and Melissa are terrific. I love the studio, and I really love what you guys are doing. I mean, you know, not only the giving back, but you know, some of the creative fine art printing that you're doing is just phenomenal. Phenomenal.
well, and you know, I've always appreciated having you come visit. You're your own inspiration, you know. And
The best Indian food in New Jersey.
yeah, right. But I thank you as well. And again, you know, dare I have to repeat myself, but there are two very important ingredients in making beautiful silk screens for me, and it's the paper and the ink. You know, and so I want to thank you for all the years you've invested in the paper.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure.
Without you, I mean, that's
Okay.
go another hour, but do it another.
All right. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Melissa.
You're welcome.